Good morning, everyone. This webinar will be about Solidedge data prep for Teamcenter. My name is Jamie Griffiths. I'm a Teamcenter architect with Applied CAX. We do this every day is our motto. We support CAD, CAM, CAE, and PLM. The products are NX, Teamcenter, FEMAP, SimCenter, Star CCM Plus, and Solidedge. Who is Applied CAX? We're experts. We can also help you be an expert. So feel free to reach out for us at any of these areas. And so here you can see our team, and maybe you can pick me out. This is our PLM team, our Teamcenter support team. We have Randy Ellsworth. He's our Teamcenter solution architect. He's an expert in installations and configurations. Myself there in the middle, Teamcenter architect. My background is with data migration, CAD integrations, installations as well. We have Arden Bedell. He's another Teamcenter expert. He is really great at workflows, BMIDE, configurations. On the bottom, we have Matt Martin. He's our mechanical design engineer, our NX trainer, and our NX guru. And he's in a lot of our webinars that you'll find online. Our newest member of the team is Bruce Gillian. He's our PLM project manager and business analyst. Bruce is great at driving business analyst sessions, finding requirements, and keeping PLM projects on track. Our sales support side, we have Taylor Saul. He's our senior technical account manager. He supports all your needs for PLM. And executive support, we have Pat Barrett. He's the owner and president of Applied CAX. These are our core products that we support: NX CAD, NX CAM, FEMAP, NX, oh, my slide went forward, sorry. FEMAP, NX Nastran, Teamcenter, Solidedge, Star CCM, and SimCenter 3D. You can find these and more information on our website about our core products. Now let's get started with our webinar on Solidedge data prep for Teamcenter. So first I want to overview a few important things about getting your system and your data ready for prepping. You need to pick a workstation to do all your prep, import, data prepping and import activities. This workstation should have Solidedge installed, same version that you're going to use that's going to be connected with Teamcenter. You want a minimum of 4 gigabytes of memory. More is always better. I prefer 16 when I'm doing my processing. You'll need Microsoft Office Professional 2007 or newer. The data prep tool does use Excel, and so if we're processing more than 65,536 files, it will need to use the 64-bit Office Excel. Very important. Before you start doing any prepping, back up your data. You don't want to make any changes to your existing data and not be confident in that. So there's, this process, we would want you to make a backup just in case you need to go back to get a file or you've made a mistake. And copy the data that you're going to be importing to the computer that has the data prep tools. This is also making a copy. Also, that way your original data is a backup and you have your own isolated copy to work with. Very important. I put this in a different color because it's very important. Isolate your computer from the network for prepping. This will speed up the processing and it will force the tools to use your container and discover the missing files. So Solidedge has some option files on how it opens and finds files, and the first thing it does is it tries to look in the same folder or container that the files are in. If it's missing from that location, it will start reaching out across your network and trying to resolve to absolute path. And what happens is if you have a distributed network and you have files at different sites on different computers, it's going to go try to find those, and that's going to slow this entire process down. So it's very important to isolate this computer and not be connected with the rest of the network when you're doing this prepping. You will find a major difference in your prep time. Another important point is to identify any non-Solidedge data that's not linked to your Solidedge files that you have in your container or your folder that you're going to be used for prepping. We can't prep the non-linked, non-Solidedge data with the data prep tools. We can, if you have an Excel file or a JPEG file, etc., import it into your draft file. Those are linked and we can use those. But non-linked data, we cannot process with the data import tools. You'll need to import this data into Teamcenter using other methods. There's out-of-the-box tools with Teamcenter that can be used to import non-Solidedge data. Logically divide your data into imports. Mass data imports over 20,000 files needs special considerations. So if you have isolated your data and you have 100,000 files, it's best to look at that data and see how you can logically divide that up into smaller imports. It'll be easier to prep and it will be easier to import. If you do have over 20,000 files, please contact us at Applied CX for further discussions on best practices and assistance with that. It does take time to process and prepare your data for Teamcenter. This all depends on how much data you have and the state of your data. Siemens has estimated approximately a week to process 15,000 files. This does depend on the state of your data. So if your data has a lot of modifications that need to be made, you have a lot of broken links and you have to find files, that's clearly going to take more time. But if your data has been fairly isolated to just one folder or it's coming out of some system, that data might be in a better state and would process a little bit faster. Import rates for Add to Teamcenter vary. It's approximately 250 files per hour. Again, this varies depending on the size of the data, the size of the files, how many links they have. So this is just an approximation. When you go to Add to Teamcenter, you can do some smaller imports and you will get those import rates for your data. Because this data is going into Teamcenter, we need to define the Teamcenter user IDs that we're going to be using for this data before we start. The user ID is the owning user of the imported data that we're putting in Teamcenter. This user or users that we're going to define must already exist in Teamcenter. If there's not an account in Teamcenter, the tool doesn't know where to put it, so you're going to get an error. Do not use InfoDBA or any other DBA user to own your data. The data in Teamcenter is owned by specific groups, and there are access controls that are controlling who can do what with that data. And when you import your data, and if you put it in the DBA group, then your engineering group won't be able to modify that data. So you would have to go back in after the fact and change ownership, and that can take some time in Teamcenter. So it's better to just be prepared and do that up front. Make sure those users exist in Teamcenter. Now, if you have data that spans over many years and you don't have those users anymore, and you don't want to add those users in Teamcenter, that's fine. Define a migration user account in Teamcenter that's going to own your legacy data and put that user in the engineering group. When you're working with your data in your isolated folder, look for duplicates because your folder could have subfolders. That's okay. We can work with subfolders in the data prep tools and the import tools, but we can't work with duplicate document names or document numbers unless you have MFK or multi-field key turned on. We're going to continue with this presentation as if we don't have MFK turned on. That is usually 90% of the cases for Teamcenter installations. The Solidedge and Teamcenter properties must already be mapped before we start this. We need to know what our custom properties are in our Solidedge files and what those are going to be in Teamcenter. So what is that landing spot in Teamcenter? So we need to look at our data model in Teamcenter or have somebody who's familiar with that give us the properties, and we define property A is property B in Teamcenter. So we do that with attribute mapping, and we just make sure that's in place before we get started. There are some existing attribute mappings that cannot be changed. These are set. The document number in the Solidedge file will equal your Teamcenter item ID or your part number. The Teamcenter item ID must follow the existing naming rules in Teamcenter. So if your naming rules are 6 numbers, then your item IDs that you're using must have 6 numbers. If you want a -A, -B, that has to be in your naming rules for that to work. So we just have to make sure our document number will resolve itself and would be able to be created in Teamcenter if we did it manually. The revision field in the Solidedge file is the revision ID field in Teamcenter. The project name property in our Solidedge files will be our Teamcenter item name. So this one's a little unusual, but it's okay. I'll show you how to work through it. So I know that title is a lot of the times used for the descriptions or names in Solidedge, and we will just have to move those to the project name. So we'll be able to move that data around, and I'll show you that further in this webinar. And then we have to have a Teamcenter item type, and so we may have more than one. We just need to know what those are to define those for our files. And that's the overview, kind of the basic things to know before you get started and have ready to go. So to get ready with the tool, get started, we're going to open the data prep utility. You're going to find this located under the Solidedge Start menu. Once we've clicked and opened the data prep utility, we're going to set our environment to Teamcenter because this is what we want to prepare our data for. And then we have the option of setting a working folder. And I highly suggest you do this because if you don't, it's going to be left in your user folder in very far down in like app data. And it's really hard to get to. So this is where it's going to create all your log files and all the files that we use for processing the data migration. In this example, I've set it on the C drive into a data migration folder. You can make a new folder if you need to in the tool as well. The next step, once you've set the Teamcenter and the working folder is, notice that there are 4 tabs along the top. And so we're going to work through these. We'll walk through back and forth through some of them. But the first step is to select the Generate Import List. And make sure you're on that tab. And when you do that, we're going to import the data, or select the folder for processing for importing the data. So select the Files and Folders button. Here you can add files or add folders, or a combination of both. And for this example, I just did add folder, and I had the area that I'm working in is data migration, and notice that there is a subfolder in there. So once I've selected my folder or folders, I'll select OK. The folders and files that are listed in the UI are what we will start processing. This area right here. I've only have one selected, but I could have many folders and many different files depending on what I've selected. You can include subfolders, and you can define what types you want to process. So if you, right now I have set it for all types, but if I only wanted to look at parts, I could do that by itself, or I could do assemblies by itself, or drafts. So you have these options that you can kind of work through to just investigate data. If you don't want to prep it, this is a good way to also investigate your data and the state of your data. So once you have this selected, we're going to select the generate import list. Now this is going to take a while. If you have 50 files, it'll probably take a couple minutes. If you have 6,000 files, it could take an hour. If you have 100,000 files, you might have to wait over the weekend. So that's why dividing up the data into logical blocks makes sense, because you don't want to just hang up your whole workstation for the whole weekend trying to chug through that data. If there are any broken links in your files, you will get a prompt. That's the first prompt you'll get. If you do not have any broken links, you won't see this screen, you won't see this prompt. So this one has 5 broken links, and I've selected the View Broken Links button. This brings up this HTML, this XML page, and you can see that this parent, the coffee pot assembly, is missing these 3 files. Now I did grab this out of the training folder for Solidedge to prep, so you'll notice that their absolute path isn't even the training folder that's installed with Solidedge. So because it resolves to the container it is in first, and that's why you can open these files from the training folder. So this is just to show me a quick list of the information and the problems I'm going to have to resolve first, because you have to fix broken links before you can continue and modify your data. Next, we'll switch back. You can close that page, and we'll switch back to the View Properties tab. We need to create our custom properties list, and if you're working with a lot of files, you may not actually know the extent of the differences in this custom properties. You may have materials spelt a couple different ways. Like here, it's material 1 on the side. You may have some things that are misspelled if people have hand typed in these custom properties. So the best thing to do is click this Generate Custom Properties report and get a full list out of all the files that you've prepped to see all those custom properties. And then you get to make a decision on what information do you want to see in this spreadsheet for your modifications. And this is a way to kind of clean up your data at the same time. We will take those properties and we're going to add them to the data prep utility template Excel file. Now this is located in your C program, Siemens, Solidedge program file folder. I suggest making a backup. I always make a copy and rename it to original. So I have my original copy, and then the one without the original in the file name is the one that I'm going to modify. So you're going to open up this spreadsheet and you're going to add your custom properties. Notice there are yellow columns down here. These are the required Teamcenter properties that we discussed before. And then these blue columns are common properties that are in the Solidedge file. So we're not going to remove any of that. We're going to keep all of that in the spreadsheet, but we're going to add our custom properties at the end of that. So everything that we add in these columns to the side, whether it be 2 fields or 25 fields from our custom properties, will be in the spreadsheet before we start analyzing it. And if the tool finds those custom properties, it'll put the values in the spreadsheet for us. So we're going to see, we could see a mess, or we may see it's very consistent, but it'll give us the opportunity to clean up whatever we don't like, or if we're making changes to values to fit a list of values in Teamcenter. So if you had a custom field and in Teamcenter it has a list of values, we can modify those values here so they are the same as the list of values in Teamcenter. So it's a little bit of flexibility to clean up the data for Teamcenter. Once we've added those columns, let's save and close that spreadsheet. And that way those columns are existing in the data prep utility. We go back to the data prep tool. It's already open. You don't have to close it. You can keep it open as you're moving through all these steps. There's no need to close it unless you need to reboot for any reason. So back in that tool, still on the View Properties tab, we're going to select Analyze. And this is going to start looking through the folder and through the broken links, and it's going to build our spreadsheet with our properties in it. So this will also take a while depending on how many files it needs to analyze. Once it's done, it will open up the spreadsheet and we can start fixing our broken links first. So this is, you can see it's giving us some information in this spreadsheet. In that spreadsheet, there's two tabs at the bottom, the Teamcenter tab and the Broken Links tab. And we're going to work with the Broken Links tab first because we need to fix those broken links. So what we're going to do in the replacement path is put our folder that we're using, our data migration folder, or whatever the folder is that you've named. And we're going to copy those missing files into that folder. But notice that we have some assembly files in here. And if we had some draft files missing as well, we need to make sure we grab all the files that are linked to that. So if you were just to grab these 3 assembly files and these 2 part files and we were to reprocess, we'd find more missing links, broken links, because we didn't grab all the pieces in those assemblies. So this is a good opportunity to find that assembly and use Design Manager to make that copy and make sure you know that you're taking that full assembly. So once we've put our replacement path in here, we need to put our replacement file name. So if it's the same file name, that's great. If it's not, we're going to have a little bit of difficulty. So we would discuss that at a later point. But usually these are going to be exactly the same thing that you're looking for. Save and close that spreadsheet. And then we're going to go back and we're going to be on the next tab, the Fix Broken Links tab, and verify that that spreadsheet is the right name. So as we go through this process, we're going to be creating multiple spreadsheets, and we want to make sure we're processing the right spreadsheet. So always look at this and make sure we're processing on the correct spreadsheet. Now, this spreadsheet name is the one that the tool automatically generates. So if you don't like it, feel free to change it before you get started. You can close the spreadsheet when it opens. You can change the name to whatever makes sense. Just make sure that the one that you're using is listed here. And then we'll hit the Fix Broken Links tab. So what it'll do is it'll start processing what we have in the spreadsheet. And when it's done, it will tell us at the bottom, it's finished processing, and the View Log button will become available. Make sure you always select that View Log button. This will just always say finished processing, but it won't tell you you have any errors. And you need to look at the log to see if you're missing a file or if it couldn't move a file or whatever the error is. You just want to make sure this file is clean before you move on. And in this, once you click that button, it just opens it right up so you can look, and it processed this number of links and it finished processing. So I have no errors and I'm ready to continue my process. The next step after fixing those broken links is to reprocess that data. And because you want to make sure you don't have any additional broken links. Now, using the design manager helps with that, but those original files that we were missing won't be in our original list on the Teamcenter tab. So we need to get them moved over with the data. And we don't want to manually do that, so we just reprocess that. And so you go back to the generate import list, select the files and folders, reselect your folder, and process. And if there's no broken links, the tool will move on and open a new spreadsheet. So it won't open the existing old spreadsheet. It creates a new spreadsheet every time you process. Now that we have no broken links, we can continue and start working on making modifications to this data. So what do we need to clean? What do we need to do? And you're going to investigate the spreadsheet. And I like to move left to right. It just makes sense for me, and start modifying properties that way. Notice that in my file name, I have names, spaces, but in Teamcenter, what happens if you are integrated with Solidedge, it's going to use your naming rule, and it's going to apply your part number as your dataset name. It's not going to have revisions in there. It's going to match that. So I like to just mimic that so that it's the same for all the data that's living in Teamcenter. So it's not confusing to any user at any point in their cache when you see this file name, but you don't know what the part number is later. So having that part number as a file name is just easier once you've moved into a managed environment. And so what we do is we create a new path because we can't rename and copy the data in the existing path. So here I've created a new path and I've just put a folder called prep1. This folder doesn't exist. It'll create it when it needs to. And then I've given it all my new part numbers. So I'm going to assume that I know what my part numbers are, or I've got this from some other spreadsheet. Maybe it's an extract from an ERP system or some other database, but somehow I figure out what these part numbers are and I put them in there. And make sure you have your file extension, because if you don't have a file extension, it doesn't know what kind of file it is. And next we'll move on to the required properties that need to be filled out with Teamcenter. So we're going to verify the document number and the revision number. And as you notice in this example, this isn't correct, but this is how the data was. And so now I need to just fix it. So obviously I can't have just 3 lines that have a dash. Those aren't correct part numbers. And so I need to fill it out. So I've corrected that example and I've used the same part numbers that I used in the file name, but without the extension. So this is, if you're going in Teamcenter and looking up your part number or your item ID, this is the number you're going to look for. You make sure your revision is correct. Dash could be a valid revision for your environment, but dash also could be an empty value. So maybe there wasn't anything set in this property. So you need to look at those dashes and make sure that's appropriate. So should this be a 0? Should this be an A? Is dash okay? You've got to know what that revision needs to be. Your project name is the item name that you're going to see in Teamcenter associated with this part. So, do you want these all uppercase? Do you want to remove special characters? Do you want to format this? This is your opportunity to kind of correct that information before it goes into Teamcenter. And then you have to have a Teamcenter item type. You can have multiple types. You may have designs and parts. You may have custom types here. So you just have to know your data and know what types those are going into. I just want to note there are 3 special Solidedge tabs that come with the data prep utility, and they've created these tabs with some macros and programming in the back to help with some data cleanup and make modifications easier. This example I've shown is copying the file name to the project. So it will just take all of these file names and copy them to the project name without the extension. But make sure that's correct before you do it, because it's going to do the whole entire column. This one doesn't let you do just 3 or 4 of them. So you kind of have to decide if that's appropriate, but just know there's some tools in here for you to split the file name, copy the file name to the document number. So if these are valid part numbers, you can get them into the document number. So there's some tools there to help you. And you can make modifications after it lands over here as well. We're not done with this by no means, but these tools will help you process this data. The author column is mapped to the owning user in Teamcenter, usually. If you don't have this column mapped, you can use a different column, but usually we use the author. So look at this formatting and make sure these users exist in Teamcenter and their user ID is the same as Teamcenter, and correct this column so that's ready to go for Teamcenter imports. And then as you look at the rest of this, I have my custom properties. And in this example, I have next assembly and I only have one property. If I wanted to have, if I had multiple material columns and I wanted to combine them, I just copy it all to the one that I wanted to be mapped in Teamcenter. So you just move the data around as you want to and as makes sense, and correct any misspellings, correct any formatting that you want. So whatever is going to happen over here in this whole entire spreadsheet is what we're going to push back into the files. In the SE Final Check tab, I just want to make note that there is a string removal tool, and you can remove dashes with it. But be careful with this when you do clear all cells containing a dash, because if you have dashes in your part numbers or in your file names, in your descriptions, and you want to keep those, you're not going to want to click the clear all cells because it's going to take it out of all of the cells in the spreadsheet. So you might want to just do it column by column basis where you see columns that you don't want that dash in, and do that instead. But it's a quick way to help you remove that information. So I've done that for the whole spreadsheet because for my spreadsheet, I knew there was no dashes in those part numbers or file names. And you'll notice that it clears all those dashes that we were seeing. Another step before we modify any data is we need to set the file status to available. So if you've been using Solidedge for a while, you may have taken advantage of the internal status that's in the Solidedge files to baseline or release and obsolete those files. But for Teamcenter, we need those back to available so that Teamcenter embedded client can manage those files at that point. And Teamcenter will use statuses to control it. So we no longer need to use the internal mechanisms of the Solidedge. So under the Solidedge Data Prep tab, we'll just set this file status to available. Now this is a good way if you're dealing with a lot of data right now and you have some issues in setting available, you can use this just to set, run this through the data prep tools to set all your files to available. And that works even if you weren't putting it in Teamcenter. It's kind of a shortcut. So once that is finished, verify that you've made all the changes and you're happy with your spreadsheet, and these are the changes you want to make. And save your spreadsheet. Back in the data prep utility, under the modify properties tab, the fourth one over, again, verify that you have the spreadsheet that you're working on and that you just saved. And then we're going to select modify properties. We're going to make those modifications that we did in the spreadsheet. So this is going to take a while. It's going to need to chug through and either create new properties, add values to properties. And so we'll just watch the status at the bottom and it will tell us how many files we're processing and it'll give us an update. Once it's finished, it'll say finish processing, and then we can review the log. Again, always review the log because we don't know what it can't do. So in this case, it's copied 34 files to the new folder location, and it's modified properties for 34 files. I have no errors in here, so I'm good to continue. Now that those properties are modified and we've moved those files, we've just broken all the links. So now we need to fix those links. And the way you do that in this process is you go back into the spreadsheet, and everywhere you have a new path and a new file name, you need to put an X in the delete column. And what we're going to do is go to the Solidedge Data Prep tab, and there is a delete marked button. We're going to select that. It's going to delete all the original files, not the new ones, but all the original files from that location. You can go verify this when it's done, and you can look in that data migration folder and see all the files are gone, and all the new ones that are renamed are in the new folder path. So once that's finished, again, we go back to the data prep tools, but this time we need to go back a step. We need to go back to fix broken links. Again, verify you have the right folder or the right Excel file. And instead of fixing the broken links, we're going to rename and fix the links. So we're going to select the middle button. We're going to verify that we have the correct spreadsheet. We're going to select the locate folders containing SE files and make sure we have our new folder location where we told the spreadsheet to put those new files. Once those two are selected, notice I leave all these defaults because I'm working with all these file types. I select the Fix Broken Links button. This will take a while, as we've said before. And then once it's finished, it'll say Finish Processing. Click that View Log and make sure you don't have any errors with it changing that link. And so you'll see that it will list where the previous link was and what it's changed it with. And so this looks good. And now we can go to the next step. What I like to do at this point, I just modified all the properties, I fixed the links. So the data should be good to go in Teamcenter, but I like to do one more check. I like to run it through again, just to verify the tools picked up all the links. And so what I do is I run the generate list again on my new folder and verify there's no broken links. And so with this new spreadsheet that's opened, you'll see that I have the new folder path and the new file names, and all of the data that I corrected is now showing up in that spreadsheet. This is your one last chance. If you wanted to make a few more modifications to the data, you could do it in the spreadsheet and then modify those properties. And then the data should be good to go into Teamcenter. So in review, prepping data for Teamcenter is an iterative process. You're going to go back and forth until you have all of your data prepped, you have all the broken links done. This is going to take some time, so give yourself enough time to go through and do all those processing. You know, it does depend on how much data you have to process. So if you only have 1,000 files, you won't need as long as somebody who has 100,000 files to process the data. And just reprocess and reprocess until that data is clean. You don't want any surprises when you get to the Add to Teamcenter spot. You don't want your import to stop in the middle because you didn't find something in the data. You didn't reprocess and make sure it was clean. So it's better to just keep going and making sure that data is clean before we get to Add to Teamcenter. Once that data is clean, we can use the Add to Teamcenter tools provided by Solidedge for importing the data. There is two tools. There's the normal Add to Teamcenter, and this one you would select the folder, and we could go through this more in depth, but this seminar we're not doing that. But this would be the add to Teamcenter would be the tool you would want to import more than 100 files. So if you're doing large imports, you're going to want to use the add to Teamcenter tool. There is an add to Teamcenter interactive tool. This is something you would use for like less than 100 files. If you're ongoing and need to add customer parts to your system, you would use add to Teamcenter interactive instead, but you would still need to make sure the data is prepped and ready to go in Teamcenter. This is just a little different UI for that. And the basic steps that we went through in this process is backup and isolate your data. Generate your first import list, and you're going to review that. Generate that custom properties report. Review those properties. What do you see in those files? What do you want to look at in that spreadsheet? Even if you're not going to make those modifications to the file, but you can investigate your data this way. Add those custom properties that you want to see into that data prep spreadsheet before you start any analysis on that data. Once that's done, we analyze the data. If we have broken links, we fix those until we find no more broken links. Then we move on, we fix file names, we verify the Teamcenter properties, we modify any other additional data in the spreadsheet and make sure we save those. And then we modify the properties in the data prep utility. If we're fixing file names, make sure we delete the original files and we go back and rename and fix those broken links. If you miss this step, then everything is broken when you move those files. And then when you analyze it, it will scare you because everything is broken. Analyze the new data and verify it's clean, and just repeat this process until it's clean. It's better, like I said, it's better to do it at this step and with your isolated data. If you've made a mistake, that's why we've made the backup. You can go grab that original data and copy it over into your folder and do the analyze and replace those files through the spreadsheet. So once you're ready to go, then you're going to add it to Teamcenter. And once it's in Teamcenter, now you're managed and now you're ready to go. Okay, let's see if we have any questions. We have a question, is this process specific to Solidedge or can we apply it to other CAD tools? The basic concepts are the same for other CAD tools, but each CAD tool has or may not have data prep utilities. So Solidedge has one of the best data prep utilities for Teamcenter with all of these processes in this tool and the ability to do it in a spreadsheet. So unfortunately, if you're doing Solidworks or Creo or Catia, it's not going to be as easy. Those steps are completely different on how you would modify that data. It's going to be more of a manual step that you would try to automate. Let's see if we have any more questions before we end the seminar. Is there any specific questions related to your data? Maybe you've ran these tools and you're stuck on a step. I can also help you with that. Another question came in. Do you have a strategy for migrating Solidedge standard parts? Yes. So if you're using the Solidedge standard part library, those files must be processed and imported to Teamcenter first before you do any other processing in Teamcenter. And you have to go through and add those files to a new Solidedge Teamcenter standard part database. So that step is a bit tricky, but we do have some Semen documents that I can share with you that Siemens has come up with that processing. We can also help you through that process if you need, if you're not comfortable with that strategy. But once you've got that stuff into Teamcenter, you have it in your folder, when you prep your data, you're just going to want to point to those standard parts in your assemblies. So that's where it gets tricky, because you have to make sure that you're picking those right files that you've already imported into Teamcenter first. Hopefully that answers the question. And let me know if there's any documents that you'd like to see on that. It doesn't look like I have any more questions right now. You may think of some questions as you're walking through this process, and that's okay. You can get a hold of us and we can help you. Again, I'm Jamie Griffiths, and here's my email address if you need to get a hold of me. Thank you for attending the webinar.